And wokeism is about dismantling truth. It's about removing truth. So feminism in itself is born out of an entirely negative way of looking at the world.
Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States.
It seems to me is that feminism is a tool that they have thrown gasoline on that fire in order to use it. I think the left saw something that was happening, and then they co-opted it. They used it.
Wokeism is like the perfect storm of leisured, lazy, affluent people. And that's where we seem to be in the West. So in a world where you can have almost anything, where poverty is an all-time low, where free speech was so crucial and we took it for granted, much to our era, we had to invent a problem. Hello, and welcome to the world of Taunton and Fox, or WTF, or what the f***, as some might call it, where myself and Larry Taunton go through the world and decide how on earth we got to this place and how on earth we get out of it. Larry, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How about you?
Well, I mean, any excuse to have a cigar for me, really, if I'm honest. Any excuse. So I'm pretty good.
You know, I would like to have one of those Trinidadads. You very kindly brought me a box, and that's what you're smoking. But I dare not do it here in the house, so here in the studio. So if I were sitting outside, I would be enjoying one with you.
Well, bless you. I'm also not allowed to do it here, but you know me and rules. I don't like them. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about ULEZ. We're going to talk about tweets. We're going to talk about feminism. We're going to talk about how people find security in an insecure world. Is that our plan, do we think, for session one?
Yeah, I think so. But I had a topic I'd like to bring up with you first, and then we can get to all of that. And it might be useful to tell people, a little bit about this show. First of all, we're just having fun. We will define this show more clearly as it develops, as it unfolds. But you're sitting in London. I am in Birmingham, Alabama, and I was just there with you in London. You were just here with me in Birmingham. And it raises an interesting question. My team at Dallas gave me a very interesting stat a couple of days ago. They said that 40% of my subscribers on YouTube are from the UK.
Really?
40%. Yeah, that shocked me. I would have said it was 10%. They said it was 40%, and that the same is true on my Twitter. You having just been here, let's discuss a little bit for those who, for those people in the States who've never been to the UK, and those in the UK have never been to the States, or at least to the southern states. What would you say are some of the more striking differences to you between our two cultures, our two nations, just as it relates to this part of the country where you just were?
I think that where you are, down near Birmingham, Alabama, it reminds me of the Britain of my youth, actually, where things were much... there was a solidity to it, a societal solidity to it. And, obviously it's the South is seems to be a rather religious place. God seems to feature everywhere. There's churches as many as houses in many parts of the world, and people know where their value system is based, and they have a very solid respect for each other. And I also think the Second Amendment helps sort of bring that about. The difference is, I think England has it's sort of lost its sense of what it is at the moment. No one really knows what it is. And I got a very strong sense of identity when I was with you. And, from blue-collar people to white-collar people, you felt that they orbited around the same set of values. Whereas in England, I think your values change by however many streets down you go. And I know that's true of American cities, but it seems to be true of the whole nation. We seem to be rudderless in a lot of ways culturally.
Do you think that's true even in your small towns?
I think it depends on, I mean, are human beings meant to live together in cities? Looking at the architecture that's built in London, no. The people have built little rabbit hutches and they're charged £1 million for them. And all the worst ideas seem to come out of cities. So I think the smaller the town, the smaller the congregation of people, the more likely they are to, not subscribe to a particular ideology or fall victim to, bad thinking. And that, the more geographical space there is, the more intellectual space there is as well, in a way. Would you say that was true?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, it certainly does seem... There's a T-shirt in what you just said. All the bad ideas come out of the big cities. That certainly seems to be very true. And the whole Jeffersonian ideal was that he pictured a nation of farmers. He very much believed that the closer you were to the soil, to nature, the closer you were to decency and values. And I don't know to what extent that's actually true, but I will say that. It certainly seems that the more you throw people together in large numbers and pile them on top of each other, that civility seems to eventually break down. And then when you throw into the mix of that people who don't share your values at all, you have open borders, and you're suffering the same thing there that we're seeing on our southern border here, then that really makes for a toxic mixture.
It's interesting, the British media, which are, I mean, they're just appalling on every level. They just announced that they'd rescued, they said, we've rescued 60 odd migrants and that they're bringing them safely back to Dover. So the language is even completely wrong. It's like, obviously you've got a southern border, so there's a land crossing, and you've obviously spoken about the Darien Gap and all of the horrible things that people have to go to get there. But in England, we see people wanting to come to our country with no paperwork, no documentation, no understanding of who they are, nothing. We see that as rescuing people. And I just think that's absolutely an insane way of looking at someone entering a country illegally. But we're not allowed to. There's this thing, and I think it creeps across the world, and certainly the West, of ultra compassion, sort of net zero rational thinking. Almost, it's like you've got to be completely compassionate to absolutely everybody except the enemy, which is the people who live at home. So we've seen a real rise in the Reform Party this week as Nigel Farage has taken control, and he has grabbed the cultural goose by the neck, and they've just shot up in the polls because, nothing makes any sense in a country or in a nation unless you can define what the values of that nation are. And the first value of a nation is protecting the occupants and the citizens and the subjects of that nation. Whereas England seems to have got it wrong, which is we're on a sort of colonialism apology tour, and we're now rescuing people who want to enter our country illegally. And I just think that's absolutely insane. And it's the same. I don't know whether there's a bigger plan to it, but it's the same in America. The fact that how many have come through 20 million, how many, let me ask you a question. How many undocumented illegal aliens are there in America currently, but pre-Biden? There must have been 50 million, must there?
I would guess. I don't think anyone really knows that number. And right now, the number that's pouring across the border is absolutely astonishing. And I will say this, though. I think that the quality of our immigrants is better than yours, meaning ours are coming from broadly Catholic backgrounds. Many of them are people who are fleeing socialism. There are those who would want to portray them all as criminals. I mean, I've engaged them. I've engaged them in Colombia, Panama, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Peru. Many of them are not. They're people who are just fleeing socialism. The very ideas, I hate to tell them. If I was talking to one guy who's from Ecuador, I think, and he was trying to get to California or Canada, he said, and I wanted to say to him, you do understand, you're just fleeing the very thing you're fleeing. You're going to other socialist paradises. But anyway, you're being flooded by Muslims.
Yeah.
And that's of a very, very different character than the immigrants that we're seeing.
We've had the future leader of the country, who's going to be handed a supermajority by this split on the right between Reform and the Conservative Party, Keir Starmer, who is he's basically threatening to legislate against this imaginary word Islamophobia, but and he's saying that we're going to have a de facto. We already have de facto blasphemy laws in the country, but we're going to have actual blasphemy laws in the country of this protected religious class, which you cannot in any way criticize. And I always end up at the same place with Islam, which is you can love a Muslim like you can love anybody else, but you can hate their religion if you want. That's totally fine. In the same way someone can hate Christianity, I don't have any problem with it. And I'm yet to hear a decent response from a Muslim as to what the rules are when it comes to the age of sexual consent, what the rules are about blasphemy, what the rules are about mocking the Prophet, and what the rules are about if you want to leave the religion. What are the rules? Because at the moment, it seems to me that Islam is so Neolithic in that way that if you leave, you die. And that's not really a religion, that's a cult, isn't it? That's the sort of problem. I think the whole of the UK is suddenly going, oh my Lord, we have had absolutely unfettered immigration for 30 years, as you say, not from Catholic South American countries, but from Muslim and Islamic countries. And we're now going, there's a major problem. And I don't think anyone really wants to take it on head on, because you'll be cancelled and you'll be called Islamophobic. Whereas you're not Islamophobic because you're not irrationally frightened of Islam. You just happen to think that the values of Islam that Islam promotes are not conducive or complementary to the values that Christianity promotes. And if Britain was built on Christian values, then Britain, it cannot just adopt a new set of values. It's mad. It's a very unstable place.
Yeah, and of course, that's what they want to do, is they want to destroy those Christian values, and hence the reason that they see the cultural left, they see Islam as their ally in the destruction of Christian values, and the two don't mix. Islam is in no way compatible with Western values whatsoever, and those Muslims, I have friends who will say, well, I have lots of Muslim friends who are, they're just the same as I am. Well, you're talking about people who don't take you're talking about westernized Muslims. They're only Muslim in name only. They otherwise, don't take Islam seriously. They don't take the Hadith seriously. They've never read the Quran. They don't try to model their lives after Muhammad as they're supposed to do, and hence they're just like anybody else that you might bump into. But those are people who are also being radicalized slowly, and it's because Muslim missionaries, imams are sent in, clerics are sent in to make those people feel guilty, to make them feel like bad Muslims. Hey, you're not wearing the hijab. Hey, you're not reading the Quran. You're not praying 5 times a day. And then bit by bit, you begin to see those people radicalized. That's what's happening all over Africa. And you'll hear the same kind of narrative. And it's happened to some extent in Britain. And that's to say nothing of the sex gangs, which you and I have discussed before, which was uncovered by the Times of London, and even they didn't really, at least at first, want to admit that it was Muslims. They just wanted to say it was Asians, who were committing these crimes. But let me move on to something else here that interests me, and that is you sent out a tweet last week, I think, in which you said this, and you said this when you were sitting here. We were sitting and talking on my dock or on my porch, or maybe when we were driving to a barbecue restaurant or to, shoot AK-47s or something. You made this statement, and now you've tweeted it, which fascinates me because there's an argument to be made here, and I want you to make it. Quote, wokeism is the political manifestation of feminism, divisive, vengeful, and utterly pointless. That is, end quote. That is an interesting thesis. And you didn't just come up with this willy-nilly. You've been thinking about this for a while. So let's hear it. Let's hear your argument. Develop this idea for us.
Well, no, I want you to say what you think about this. I made the statement. You respond. What do you think about it?
Well, I've heard you talk about this just a little bit, and I think that it has some merit, though we haven't discussed it at length. But I understand, at least I think I understand what you're saying here, that in a sense, this is feminism filling a cultural void that has been left by men who have retreated from the culture. So weak men have, in a sense, created, as the saying goes, hard times. And you see wokeism as a kind of feminizing of the culture and sapping us of our fighting virtues. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, I think it's there's something about, the left has existed forever. As far as I can tell, I think it goes beyond feminism in one way. But I'm always been very curious as to why there are people on this planet who want to do other people harm, and who are vengeful and divisive, and they don't want to have open and free conversations. So I've always been curious as to why that is. I do think that we've sort of homogenized the male and the female in a way which is really unhealthy and isn't reflective of what our mutually complementary skills are. So when you get and you just have to meet a feminist to see this, a modern feminist. I'm not talking about, I'd like to vote type feminist. I'm talking about a modern feminist, which is a sort of vengeful, man-hating feminist. You go, there's nothing in your ideology which is constructive. It's all destructive. And wokeism is about dismantling truth, isn't it? It's about removing truth. Hence why you've got the women can have penises problem that seems to have overtaken the West. Who would have seen that one coming? But feminism in particular, because it's unchecked and no one criticizes it, in a similar way to Islam. You're not allowed to criticize it. It's like women are amazing and they should do better than men because they've been held back and there's a gender pay gap and everything. None of it comes from a place of positivity. We don't celebrate motherhood anymore. Motherhood's a weak thing that weak women do who aren't ambitious and aren't trying to compete with men. So then you advance that way of looking at a problem and everything then becomes bad. So feminism in itself is born out of an entirely negative way of looking at the world, a hopeless way of looking at the world, which is it's Marxist as well. You are aggrieved, you are oppressed, you have been shat on by men for the whole of your life, and now it's time for revenge. And it comes with Me Too, it comes with toxic masculinity, it comes with all this stuff. And it denies the fundamental truth, which is that any human being can be toxic and any human being can be oppressed at any time in their life by anybody in their life, not in a systemic way which is totally bound to your biological sex. So I was thinking, with the rise of feminism, we've seen the rise of wokeism. And it's also nihilism, because, a true feminist would think having a child is a bad idea. So it's you're looking at the end of mankind, and I think it's probably where a lot of the climate stuff comes from as well. This idea that what's the point in having a baby because, the world's not fair and it's all going to end. And it's just that race to the bottom that comes with a grievance culture, of which feminism has morphed into. And very few people in England know that women got the vote before the men that died at the Somme did. The working man of Britain. And we like to look at the world in a very simplistic way. And it's hard to pin down, but I just get this very strong sense that any time you bring grievance, especially an imagined grievance, into into a situation, you create a politics of grievance and then a politics of division, and therefore a politics is a nihilistic politics of a race to the bottom, which then needs to be resisted by rational, sensible people. Does that make any sense? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it does. Let me try to tease this out just a little bit, though, and push back on you just so I can hear more of what your thinking is here. Is wokeism caused by feminism, or is feminism caused by wokeism? I mean, because it seems to me that it's still men, by and large, who are in charge. I mean, we do have more women in positions of power, to be sure, than we did, say, 50 years ago. But it still seems to me that if we pull back the curtain, the Wizard of Oz is still a man. Or are you saying that these are feminized men?
Well, I think there's a huge number of feminized men, but I also think that, it's where Jordan Peterson made his best impacts in discussion, which was turning around and saying, men are different from women. And instead of complaining about your lot in life, men do all the most dangerous jobs. Men do, men kill themselves in much greater numbers. Men die earlier. We've got to accept the fact that men also have it. If you want to complain that your life is so terrible and there's a gender pay gap, which it is palpably non-existent in any really meaningful sense of the word, then you've got to then allow men to have grievance in return. So the way that a man gets grievance in return is he either does it via identity politics, talking about, well, I'm a Muslim, I'm oppressed because I'm a Muslim, or I'm oppressed because I'm black, or I'm oppressed because I'm gay, or I'm oppressed now. The only way a white person can get onto this oppression scale is by becoming transgender nowadays. So I think that wokeism is like the perfect storm of leisured, lazy, affluent people. And that's where we seem to be in the West. I remember it struck me hugely when people would do interviews about being poor, of which there are poor people in this world. But some people would identify as poor in the UK. So they'd be doing an interview about how they couldn't afford anything, but they'd have a 55-inch TV screen behind them. And you were just going, that's not poverty. You haven't defined what it is to be poor. So in a world where you can have almost anything, where poverty is an all-time low, where everything, where free speech was so crucial, and we took it for granted, much to our era, we had to invent a problem and a new civil rights movement, and feminism kicked it off. And wokeism came out of feminism. That's what I would say. Yeah, I think feminism first, wokeism second.
Very interesting. One thing is absolutely certain, and that is that the way that fascists and Marxists and their tactics are very, very similar. Hitler got a lot of his ideas from the Bolsheviks, from the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, but they both use very, very similar tactics, and that is to cause disruption in any way, shape, or form that they can. And so whether that's the Gramscian, march through the institutions, or what we now call intersectionality and this sort of thing, which instead of making it about class warfare, which Marx discovered wasn't working in Britain and it wasn't working in America, and that's because there was social mobility, there was economic mobility, and so people weren't interested in his preaching of bloody revolution. What has happened in the post-Marxist era in the West is to say, hey, maybe class warfare isn't where we're going to get traction. Let's turn white people against black people. Let's turn men against women. Let's do that. And so what we have seen, it seems to me, is that feminism is a tool that they have thrown gasoline on that fire in order to use it to. For instance, I think Me Too was initially an organic thing. I don't think the left created it. I think the left saw something that was happening and then they co-opted it. They used it. They gave definition to it. They gave media hype to it. They promoted it, and thus it became. Once they got a hold of it, it became about attacking white men in power. That's what it became about, rather than actual victims. And there are real victims of sexual harassment and rape, and instead became something, it morphed into something unholy and definitely didn't involve any kind of authentic social justice. It seems to me that that's what's happened with feminism. They've just simply promoted it, used it because they don't care. Anything they can use to cause social disruption. And it feels to me that all of these things are a result of, our suppression of belief in God. And so when we come back to what we were just talking about just a few minutes ago, I can feel, as much as I travel, Laza, I can feel when I get into places like New York or Paris or London, and I'm in these places an awful lot, that I can still be jarred by the lack of common sense that still exists in a place like where I live. Britain, in some sense, Europe, I would say, pre-technological age was typically about 50 years ahead of us, ideologically speaking. And then those ideas, America, pop culture went eastward. It went from America towards Europe. But some of the real, culture shaping ideas are coming from Europe westward and hitting our shores maybe about 50 years after the fact. Now it's, seconds. It doesn't take long at all. And when I go to a place like London, say, and as we've discussed before, I was a student in Britain in the early 90s, and I'm there probably 2 or 3 times a year, so it's not like there's been a 30-year lag that I haven't been there. I've slowly watched it change, and I find myself having bizarre conversations with, say, a waitress or a hotel employee or somebody that I'm sitting next to in a restaurant, where it seems to me that they've bought into the most absurd of ideas that wouldn't get a moment's attention where I live, but are taken very, very seriously in those places. Is that wokeism? Is that feminism? Is it godlessness? Is it... What is it?
Well, I think it's a meaning problem, isn't it? Because you need meaning in your life. If you don't have meaning in your life means nothing, so you can behave appallingly, which people do to each other. We're watching a lack of meaning play out in Ukraine. We're watching lack of meaning play out in Israel. There's no, and Palestine. If we're a horseshoe and there's a gap, it's going to get replaced by something. A man who doesn't believe in God, or what's the quote? A man who doesn't believe in something will believe in anything, and that. Yeah,
G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah, I think that's completely tied into the fact that actually life is very, very easy, even for the people that are really struggling. I mean, compared to what it would have been like time and time ago, it's that toxic combination of a total lack of meaninglessness, a need for meaning, so we create secular meaning, which is oppression-based and social justice-based. You see these movements that are popping up left, right, and centre, these, especially the climate movement and all of that sort of stuff. And it doesn't mean anything. It's what are you going to change? And actually, they actively know. I was today when I found out from the police that they'd finished their investigation with me for criticising this surveillance state that they're building. In the UK, the mayor of London himself buried his own report that said there's no need for this. You've got newspapers in Holland saying people are going to have to get used to not having any electricity as we transition to a greener society. You've got wind turbines that are 1,000 feet tall off the Nantucket coast that are built by Chinese coal and steel, and we in the West are just sitting there going, we need a meaning. Whereas industry, like China's, their meaning is like, we want to be powerful and we want to succeed in this world. Whereas we're so inward looking, and the problem with looking inward is you find out that you're a flawed and broken and fallen and messed up person. So you don't want to deal with that problem, so you deal with everyone else's problems for them. Whereas
Well, that's easier, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is much easier. But you would have expected a large proportion of the population to have looked inwards and gone, "I'm fallen and broken. Therefore, why am I fallen and broken? And let's talk about those issues that make me that way, rather than just calling everyone a racist or a climate denier, or a anti-vaxxer. Or it feels like that we now live in a giant playground. That's what I feel. I feel like I look back at my dad gave me all my schoolwork from when I was 7. And I look at my son's schoolwork from when he was 7, and it's just an entirely different standard. We're dumbing everybody down and living in this sort of lazy, affluent world where we don't have, I was listening to Richard Dawkins and Hirsi, and one of the hardest things about God actually is that you say sometimes to me, you should proclaim your faith, you should, and take it seriously. But it's very difficult in a humble faith, like Christianity is quite a humble faith. It demands that you listen to others and you love them and all that sort of stuff, as opposed to Islam, which is a very front-footed faith, which is like, get out there and Islamify places. So I think it's almost the perfect storm of the end of the West, because I don't know when people are going to start taking themselves seriously, and then I don't know when people are going to start taking the threats to them and their way of life seriously. And it doesn't seem like anyone is doing it, except we've got this Reform Party in the UK, and it's getting huge amounts of traction. I just wonder why the Conservatives aren't doing it. And actually I look at Trump and I go, if Trump wasn't there, yes, you've got DeSantis, who is good on this sort of stuff. And the Republicans have a good number of politicians on the right, but on the Democrat side, I mean, who is there? Whereas in the UK, we've got useless Conservatives and relatively competent left wingers. I find the whole thing baffling.
What were you going to say about Dawkins and Hirsi Ali?
So Dawkins was pushing Hirsi Ali, and she's very modest. So she's like, I'm just a beginner. And she was trying to describe...
In her faith.
Yeah, and she was trying to describe the transformative experience. And she was very open and honest. She said she was suffering with incredible depression. She couldn't find a cure in the sort of modern scientific way. And she saw a therapist who said, maybe you have a spiritual crisis, you're in spiritual crisis. And it got worse and worse and worse, and she prayed, and she had a transformative experience. And Dawkins then attacked her in a sort of, like cultural Christians do, by saying, yeah, but you don't actually believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and he was born of the Virgin Mary, and he died and then was resurrected, do you? You don't really believe that, do you? And she was sort of defenseless, because she was saying, I know it. It's not really a question of whether I believe it or not. And we're guilty of not saying that. And our churches are, as I think I've said to you before, the Church of England is just Henry VIII's divorce court. That's all it was.
Well, I don't know that I've told you this, but when I was just in Geneva, and of course we have discussed the kind of anti-World Health Organization pandemic treaty, a conference that I was attending there, but I'm out for dinner with this Dutch politician and his staff. And these are people that are, conservative in the broadest sense, okay? They're not Christians. They're very secularly minded, like most continental Europeans. And for them, I probably look like of course, he's a stereotype. He's from Alabama. Of course, he believes in God. But this conversation comes up where something that we discussed on your show, Fox and Father, your other show, this whole idea of evil, that people are encountering evil. And Hirsi Ali, if I understand her conversion correctly, it was an encounter with evil that led her to belief in Jesus Christ, not that she was encountering all these great people and going, wow, I wonder what's so unique about them. They're Christians, no matter. I want to become a Christian too. No, it was that she was confronted with an evil that she's seeing, as we are, as many people are, like a dark cloud that is rolling over the Western world. And she realized this is spiritual in nature. This is a spiritual darkness, and it made her reconsider her atheistic commitments. And so she thought, you know what? Its opposite must be real. There must be a real, true, absolute God. Well, that was the nature of this conversation that I'm now having with these Dutch politicians and policymakers out at this restaurant in Geneva. We're sitting at a big table, and it started, I'm talking with this woman next to me who brings up the problem of evil. A couple of other people begin to chime in, and before long, the whole table is involved. And the question centers around the kinds of things that we see the globalists doing. Are they truly evil, she asked, or is it that they really think that they're really good? And so the problem of spiritual evil came up, which led us, of course, to a discussion of God. And this Dutch politician, in very Richard Dawkins-like manner, just as he did with Hirsi Ali, says to me, you believe in the resurrection? I mean, you believe that a man was raised from the dead? And, I was determined, I'm not going to give a little mealy mouth kind of, yeah, I think I'm not going to give the Jordan Peterson, well, yeah, probably, but I'm not sure what it means, kind of response. I said, no, absolutely, I believe that. My faith hinges upon that. The Apostle Paul said that Christians above all are to be pitied if the resurrection itself isn't true. And I said, what do you believe? That there was absolutely nothing, and then poof, there was something? I mean, which of the two requires a greater leap of faith? I think yours does rather than mine. But this kind of brings me back to something you were saying earlier, and that is the bit about feminism and the Church of England. But it's not just the Church of England. It's across the Western world. C.S. Lewis said in Mere Christianity, Christianity is a fighting religion. How many pulpits would a remark like that, which is, by the way, biblically true, how many pulpits in Britain would a statement like that resonate in?
Not many, I don't think. But I think Britain is going to go through a shift itself. It would be interesting to know, after the disaster of this Archbishop of Canterbury, who's heading towards the end of his tenure now, whether anybody will be able to name the next one, or whether there'll be a campaign to not have another Archbishop of Canterbury in this country. I think there's a hatred. I often think that you can see things by how much something is hated, in the same way as, when you're upset, when you're wrong, you tend to be more upset about something. The absolute hatred of Christianity in this country means that that like everything else, it's gaining in power. And I've got friends who have churches they start churches. They don't do any of this. It's more the American style. And they're saying that they are getting huge numbers of young people, because they're completely, if you think about it, they say that 1996 was the worst year to ever be born, really, in terms of just mental health. Obviously, people born to go and fight in wars was a horrible thing for people. But just in sort of general peacetime levels of happiness, 1996 was, I think Jonathan Haidt said it, is the worst year to have been born. You were just turning kind of 18, 19 when the first smartphone came out. And I think young people are flocking in search of meaning now, because anecdotally, my own children find the woke stuff, the Pride months, the race baiting, all of that, they find it laughable. And they don't enjoy it. So I think while the church, you won't hear a fighting religion preached from many pulpits in this country, you might find that the congregations want to hear that as they grow. But we have a problem in England anyway of churchgoers. People tend to go to church in the UK in the same way as they go to the pub. You have to go to church, so you go to church, and it's the same sort of thing. But I think the next generation are going to be much more rigorous in their demands of those who lead them, because you're going to have to be. Otherwise, my granddaughters will grow up in hijabs. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali said something interesting as well in that interview. She was very clear to draw a very strong line between Islam and Christianity. So she said part of her conversion to Christianity was a direct result of her absolute hatred of Islam. And she, it's almost that sort of woke her up and prompted her into okay, here's a real threat. And then you get into the more, which will divide even a secular Western Muslim, is this idea that you will upset a secular Western Muslim by saying that Islam is a death cult. That will upset them a lot. But if you go, okay, but it is a death cult, to those that truly, truly, truly follow the word, it is a death cult. And then, so younger Christians are going to have to be more robust, I think, in their response. This inclusivity thing that is driving Western society, which is about as exclusive as anything I've ever witnessed, will fall down in the face of the spiritual war, which ultimately love wins, and Jesus Christ will win this war because he's already won it for us already. So it's just a strange time to be alive, when you think, oh God, what was it like to have been a Jew in Nazi Germany in the 30s? Or what was it like to be, a kulak in Russia? And what was it like to be this at this time? And you go, we are in that time. We're in a time where we're in the pre-time, aren't we? We're in the Weimar Republic part of the Nazi, the rise of the Nazis. That's it. Everyone knows something is wrong, but they don't really know what to do about it.
Well, it certainly seems to me that part of that, the antidote, I think, Hirsi Ali, for those who don't know who she is, she's a Somali-born. She was mutilated. She was given female circumcision by the Islamic cult. In her own home country. She fled Somalia, sought asylum in the Netherlands. She was given it. She was a parliamentarian for some time, and now she's part of the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. She's a very thoughtful individual, but for a time, recognizing the evil of Islam, her answer to that was the wrong answer. She became a rabid atheist, and she was hanging with all of the so-called new atheists and promoting that religion. And atheism, by the way, is a religion. I mean, it becomes a religion. It becomes a cult in and of itself. And now she's become a Christian, and her former colleague, Richard Dawkins, said he came to press her at, I think what you're talking about, this confrontation took place about a month ago at the Dissident Dialogues conference that was held in New York. And what I thought is very interesting is that Richard Dawkins said on a recent podcast, he said that Jordan Peterson isn't a Christian. And he said, and I'm not one either. But then he said to Hirsi Ali, which is fascinating, and he said it backhandedly, but I think it's actually an enormous compliment to her. He said, I came to this event to tell you that you're not a Christian, that you don't believe any of this, but I come away saying, no, you are a Christian. So he came away convinced she is a Christian. She is a genuine Christian because she's ready to embrace the things he considers to be nonsense, the miracles, as it were, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, creation, or whatever it may be. And he feels that, Peterson just kind of skates around on all that stuff, and he obfuscates and doesn't really answer the question. But I actually thought that was an enormous compliment to her. But you had said that I have pressed you on being a little more public about your faith. And I have for this reason, because it is a part of who you are. It's steps that you're taking. It's increasingly forming and shoring up that ideological foundation of yours, but also because I think there is a cultural misunderstanding. And, I mentioned Peterson again here because Peterson has asserted wrongly, that is to say, biblically speaking, wrongly, that for someone to say that they're a Christian is an assertion of moral superiority. That's complete nonsense. It's not that at all. And so I think there are a lot of people who feel sheepish about mentioning that they're Christians because they think that in doing so that they're asserting, their own goodness. To be a Christian means you've recognized that, of course, you're not good and that you need an external in the person of Jesus Christ to assist you because you recognize that. There are legalistic Christians, to be sure, but legalism isn't a product of the Christian faith. It's a product of human nature. I mean, some of the most legalistic people I've ever met were secularists. They were people who were promoting the woke ideology, who were promoting recycling, who were promoting COVID masks. I mean, these are some of the most legalistic people you will ever meet. But I think that Hirsi Ali is providing a model for the right response to wokedom, because she has said, and I have said this many times myself, that secularism is toothless against the twin threats to Western values. And those are militant Islam and woke ideology, which is, as you've pointed out, it's simply Marxism by another name. Secularism is absolutely toothless against those things. And she realized that there needed to be a spiritual answer to spiritual evils. These are both spiritual evils. I mean, I have right here an interesting little book by Richard Wurmbrand. I may have mentioned him to you, but he was the Lutheran pastor who suffered under both the fascists, the Nazis, and the communists in the 1940s, 30s, and 40s. Was imprisoned by both, and he's written an interesting little book here called Marx and Satan, and he quotes the poetry of Karl Marx. The poetry of Karl Marx, which is absolutely astonishing, kind of stuff, where he says that he will bring ruin upon mankind and that he will make himself like the Most High and his throne will be dread. I mean, this is stuff it's almost quoting, Satan in Scripture, who says that he will make himself like the Most High. I think Hirsi Ali is providing a bit of a model in saying, I realized that both for myself individually and for the sake of the West generally, that secularism couldn't save me, and it can't save this culture. But I need something else.
But why? What I don't understand is why the secular rationalists don't align themselves strongly with the Christians in the same way that the wokeists align themselves with the Islamists. Because if the whole idea, as you quite rightly point out, is it's not wrong to turn around and say, I'm a Christian, because that you're not asserting moral authority, and the whole idea of the creation of man anyway is free will, why wouldn't a secular rationalist turn around and say, look, Dawkins can see the problems with wokeism. He can analyze that perfectly brilliantly, and so can Peter, and so can everybody who thinks on that subject. But you would have thought the secular rationalists would get in behind the Christians in this period, rather than doing what they are doing, which is actually undermining the Christians. When they have the free will to say whether I'm bold enough or not to proclaim my own faith or to even explore it, I'm going to do the Christians down as well. So the Christians have got the enemy of the woke left, the fundamentalist Islam, and the secular rationalists to deal with. Why is that, do you think? Why are the Christians out there by themselves?
Let me float a theory to you. I have an idea as to why this is, and I think it's less ideologically driven than sociologically driven. See what you think of this. It seems to me that there are many on the political left who do not align themselves with sensibility. I mean, for instance, think of all the people who you formerly thought were sensible who are now embracing transing of adolescents. I mean, absolute Joseph Mengele kind of stuff. I mean, literally Joseph Mengele kind of stuff that you couldn't have seen 10 years ago. You know, a friend of yours justifying the lopping off of a little boy's penis and turning him into a little girl. They would have said to you 10 years ago, that's insanity. But now they defend it and promote it and act like it's the default position, that it's sensibility. There's a part of me that wonders if this isn't more sociological, meaning their hatred of and their, you could call it snobbishness, their elitism. They are loath to align themselves with quote unquote populists, that is to say with common people, with red staters. And that's because these are largely, at least in this country, a champagne sipping Manhattanites who go to each other's clubs, have never been to a red state, don't want to go to a red state, and are quite certain that they are superior in every way, shape, or form than those people who are against the transing of, say, adolescents. And therefore, they will always adopt the views, the values, or the absence of values of their own class. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I think there's I think going back to you saying that, you know, the identitarians and the Marxists realize that actually what we're not going to do is we're not going to deal with the real problem, which is a socio-economic problem, because in Western liberal democracies or, you know, constitutional republics or whatever, social mobility is quite fluid. So it's difficult to do that. But we're left in a position whereby some views are just fashionable to be held, and they sound better to be held. And I actually, you know what I think? I really think it's a hatred of faith. I think that the jealousy and the hatred of someone who is saved outweighs every other thing in the world. So even for a secular rationalist, they just go, you can hear it in Dawkins' voice. He hates the fact that she's got that. And therefore, I think that's probably what Jesus intended, in a way. I get that sense.
Well, I mean, what you're saying is so true, because what you're really talking about is, I mean, we come back to the same issue, and that is that it's a spiritual problem, that fundamentally it's a spiritual problem. And a chapter that I make frequent reference to on my own podcast, Ideas Have Consequences, is Romans 1, that says that people begin by suppressing the truth about God. They deny his existence, even though they do know that he's there. And then by the end of that chapter, it says they become haters of God, which to me is interesting, because they start out saying he isn't there, but then they become haters of him, like acknowledging at least somewhere inside there. And you're right about Dawkins. Dawkins is a hater of God, and it comes out. It just bristles from him. You know, we brought him here. I don't know if I told you this. We brought him here to Birmingham, Alabama in 2007 for a debate. And it was carried by BBC, had people here covering it, the Wall Street Journal, you name it. They were all here, London Times. They were all covering this event. Place was packed out. And I think he was sure that he was coming. You know, I mentioned this to you, that he had referred to the South as the reptilian brain, you know, of America, even though he'd never been in the American South. And I think he thought he was going to be greeted at the airport by people in pickup trucks and with pitchforks. And he was treated with absolute civility, with kindness. The people were charming in their engagement with him. They just said very politely, "We think you're wrong." And it was a very sophisticated audience that sat and listened and gave him a round of applause and said, "Thank you so much for coming." And he got annihilated in this particular debate. And the debate ended, interestingly enough, with Professor John Lennox, a man I'd like you to meet, saying to Dawkins that it all comes down to the resurrection. And you can see this on my YouTube channel. Dawkins' face becomes red with fury at the mention of the resurrection, and he begins to heap scorn upon it. And That's because that's where they are. And it reminds me of a tweet. I don't know if you saw this, but I tweeted it out myself. I've been talking about how in the Romans 1 kind of sense, what we're seeing in the culture, which Romans 1 says is a sign of a degenerate culture, is that you elevate animals while simultaneously de-elevating human beings. So I don't want anyone to, you know me well enough to know that I love animals.
Yeah.
I know that you love animals. Your Twitter feed is just populated with all these puppies, one of which is coming my way, and you love horses and so on. So I'm in no way advocating cruelty to animals, but I do understand that they have less value. And if your house is on fire and you're not there, I'm going in for Eugene, not the puppies.
Yeah.
I make a distinction between animal life and human life. And we're now at a place where human beings are being, de-elevated, where the left is all about everything other than human beings. They're anti-human.
Yeah.
And I had tweeted this. There are 73 million abortions each year. There should be a worldwide ban on abortions. And someone responded to that by saying, and this was in response to a picture, a tweet of a lion that someone had shot while hunting. And someone had said in response to my tweet, I'd rather have 100 abortions than kill a lion. Cry about it. I mean, this really kind of gets at who they are. And this comes back to what you were saying. They're haters of God. It's a spiritual thing for them. I mean, why say that? Because you want to desecrate human life. You hate human beings and you hate God's creation.
Yeah, and in order to, like you say in the Romans 1 bit, in order to hate human beings, you have to know that God exists. And that's the paradox. You have the conscious rejection of God is the worship of Satan, and then you end up with all the iterations of how much the people that we don't agree with and I see as a existential danger to all of the actual progressive things that have happened in society, is you end up with people that treat human beings like particles of a virus. And then their lives are so meaningless and so empty, but they know that God exists. Deep down, they know they are created because they value their own opinion so much that they end up in a situation where they seek zero everything. And that includes zero, it's like any human created ideology always seeks absolute harmony. And the elevation of animals, look, I have absolutely no problem with Ernest Hemingway going and shooting the big four or whatever, I have no problem with it. And also, now that we don't, we have sort of manufactured ecosystems on the planet, if people want to go and pay a huge amount of money to go and shoot an animal, I don't actually have that much of a problem with it compared to aborting a human child. And I think it's amazing that in 2024, in this world of deep compassion where everyone's really kind and, we're so kind to children that we're happy to chop their own dicks off, that we can't extend that same kindness to a baby, which is the most vulnerable and most in need. So I suppose what's happening, I think the reason why there's a tension and there's a real unstableness and a shifting sands in this world is because those two sides are getting so far apart again. There were times when you could disagree, and free speech was one of the things that was used to make sure that you could disagree cordially and respectfully with somebody, and also allow the horrible extremists to say whatever they wanted, and it would be out in the open. But it feels now we're so much further away from each other than we've been certainly in my lifetime, that we're heading towards an inflection point of some kind. And therefore the Iron Hirsi Alis of this world are picking up the sword of Christ, or that, I don't know if that's, you know what I mean though. And then
I think a good way of putting it.
And the others are going, right, well, I'm going to pick up the sword of the devil and we're going to see who's going to win. And my fear is that those people that don't believe life has any meaning at all, like that Russian guy who FaceTimed the Ukrainian soldier who he'd just blown up to girlfriends. Did you see that? He found this guy's phone. He killed him And then he found his phone and he FaceTimed his girlfriend and laughed and mocked and said, your husband is dead. Like that sort of nihilism can only really manifest itself beautifully in a beautiful way through armed violent conflict, which is what everybody else is trying to stop. We don't. No one wants conflict. Everyone's trying to put things between two men killing each other. But we're living in a time where it's totally acceptable for us to watch Russians and Ukrainians massacre each other, and we just sit and no one cares. No one wakes up in the morning and goes, "I wonder how many families lost their children last night or their young men." No one talks about it. It's like, it's the right thing to do. Let's go and kill some people. And, but then suddenly the Jews do it because they have a faith, because it's a religion-based thing. The Jews do it, and it's immediately they're on the Jews. And it's like, I've never seen mankind so far apart from itself. And that, I think, is what we're all sensing. Those of us who think and care, we're all sensing. And we're all being cancelled for saying as well.
Well, my takeaway from this event in Geneva that I attended a couple of weeks ago was this, coming back to my dinner conversation and the movement of that conversation in the direction of spiritual evil and then the existence of God and this kind of thing, is I came away thinking, the only way we're going to win this, and I believe it's a winnable battle, but we first have to understand the nature of the enemy. And that table was made up of people who were there because they believe fundamentally that the battle can be won through policy initiatives, through elections, through, campaigns, informing people. And I'm not going to say those things don't matter. Obviously they do. It's why we do a show like this. But I think the only way that it can be won is when we come to the collective understanding that this is a spiritual battle, that this is fundamentally a spiritual battle. And that's what I mean by Hirsi Ali's model, because she's saying, I've recognized it. Richard, you need to recognize it. You hate all these things that we're saying. I mean, Richard Dawkins hates wokedom. He hates it. I know Richard Dawkins. He loathes all that stuff. But he doesn't have a meaning for his own life other than one that he artificially manufactures for himself. That comes back to what you're talking about. Whereas if you're a Christian, you know very well what your mission is, and that is to assist Jesus Christ in reclaiming his creation. It's to fulfill the Great Commission. I mean, that's what animates my life. It's what animates everything that I do. I'm very clear on my mission, and anything that doesn't fit with it, I don't do. I just simply say, nope, that does not fit in line with the thesis for my life. Do you agree with me that it's going to take people recognizing that what we're facing aren't simply people with bad ideas or erroneous, policy proposals, or, somehow they're just misguided, but they are fundamentally evil?
Yeah, I don't think people are. I think that we're all fundamentally bad. So so that's that I do think. I don't think it makes someone evil to know that they're bad and do nothing about it. I think the forces of the forces of evil that work through people are extremely powerful. And you notice just how quickly mass psychosis and mass formations begin. And now that being evil is very fashionable, and it's redecorated itself, rewrapped itself, it's got much nicer wrapping paper and it calls itself good, there's lots more disciples of evil. And that's my concern, is that I've never seen so much joy and glee in people destroying other people's lives. And at the moment, we just have a cancel culture where we cancel someone's ability to earn a living, to provide for a family, to feed their children. I always found it very, very strange when I was cancelled that people gleefully celebrated the fact that I would struggle to feed my own children.
Yes.
Who are innocent,
and that shows up in the comments every now and then. Yeah.
And that's the same with these abortion people. that go, I would rather have 100 abortions than kill a lion. And you're like, that it's a reflection of how much you hate your life. You hate being alive. And I suppose for me as a beginner starter level 1 Christian, I'm like going, no, this is the most amazing thing in the world. You must love your suffering. You must be grateful for it. You must learn from it. And what immediately happens straight away when you do that, immediately, is you stop judging yourself. And then when you stop judging yourself, you can stop judging others. And it sort of infects the whole way you are as a person. So, my hope is that people realize that, that faith is a release from not from the suffering, but it's a release from the double pain of the suffering, which is the evil that comes alongside it. It's not a very articulate way of expressing it, but
let me. Pardon me, Laza. Let me offer just a modest clarification to my question. Absolutely, I agree with you in that we are all fallen. We are all evil in the sense that of spiritually speaking, biblically speaking. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. That's true of all of us. But the Bible speaks of those people also who have given themselves over to evil, meaning they have decided to become active agents on behalf of evil, versus those people who have not made that kind of willful decision. And I don't want to turn this into some kind of a church service here, but see if you agree with this. I mean, I've made reference to Romans 1. This is the end of Romans 1. This is what it says. And since they, speaking of evil people who have turned themselves over to evil, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up. There's this sense in which there's this theological concept that God himself kind of restrains humanity from going as far as they might go in their depravity. But they can reach a point where he says, fine, have it your way. And when he does, Auschwitz's happen, Darfur's happen, human trafficking happens. The great evils that we see in the world happen when God just lets go of the reins and says, fine, have it your way. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They're gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Now, is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's it, and supercharged by our ability to connect with each other in the way that we do. The anti-personal relationship of the way that we connect with each other. Just spending that time with you in America face to face. I then went to Norway couple of weeks after, and walked along a riverbank with a friend, and we just talked and talked and talked and talked, and that manifestly changes the way that you look at other people. So we are witnessing that, and we're witnessing it supercharged by distance and by lack of conversation, because none of these devices and none of these apps and none of these other than actually the long form conversation on the screen, which has become a really good thing, none of these things promote a coming together of people. They promote exactly the opposite. They promote tribalism and faddishness and weak thinking as well. I notice that all the time. So we'll just.
Do you find that?
Sorry.
Do you find that in London, because what you say is so true, you came here, there was a sense of community, both here, but among us, just hanging out together. And then it was obvious to me watching your videos, and you telling me a little bit about what you were doing and fishing in Norway. You seem like you're with a fundamentally decent guy and you're having a good time there. Do you feel like men in particular, maybe this is true of women, but I'll only speak of men, that men are longing for an absent community, even in places like, say, London, where you're surrounded by tens of millions of people, but you're still kind of isolated and alone?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, 100%. I just today got the news that my house that I've bought is outside of London, has just completed, and I will know all of the people in that community so much better than neighbours I lived next to for 5 or 6 years in London. I think we started the conversation saying that bad ideas come out of big cities, that also the last bastions of good ideas are going to remain, outside of big cities as well. So I think people are longing to communicate and connect, and they think that they're communicating and connecting on the phone, but they're not. They're just aborting ideas and relationships. It's a sort of proxy. It's like sitting on Twitter and watching the Ukrainian war and going, oh, it's terrible, got an opinion about Ukraine. It's like, well, what do you think about you and your life? And, it's rare. And I even see it in my own, amongst people that we're close to. Every relationship now that I have, and almost everyone I know has, is very strained with other people, because one issue can set it off. Because everyone's got to have a view about everything, and I think that's I think it's a very negative way of looking at the world, and it creates.
You mean you can't disagree with each other?
No, we've forgotten how to, and that comes from the family ultimately. Because where is a safe place that you can disagree with someone to the point of almost violence? It's within a family. And we think the family is as you said, we worship lions more than we worship families. So until we start, I don't even think there's a political solution to it. I think there will come a generational moment where people go, I am miserable. My life is meaningless. It has nothing in it which I hold of any value whatsoever. I will have an Iron Hirsi Ali moment. That's what I think will happen.
Well, we have reduced actual relationships to, electronic phantoms. You have followers, you have friends online. You can't actually, I find it increasingly difficult to engage with people of a different ideological persuasion. And I like to do that because I think that's helpful for me. It sharpens me. It sometimes exposes me to a way of thinking that I hadn't considered, and I recognize that maybe I'm wrong in an opinion that I had last year. I was just in a small way, but I had to spend many weeks in Rome, and I thought, while I'm here, I'm a Protestant. While I'm here, I want to find a Catholic priest, who really believes Catholic doctrine, not the Pope, in other words, but somebody who really believes it, and I want to meet with him for dinner, lunch, from time to time, and have him explain to me a lot of the things that I don't understand or don't agree with about Catholicism. I found such a guy, and he said, I'm going to try to convert you. I said, I would think less of you if you weren't trying to convert me. And so we would meet from time just to have that conversation and argue over some of these things that I have disagreed with, like, say, transubstantiation or whatever. But again, that's in a small way. Where I have found that I can actually engage with people of other ethnicities, other worldviews, that I otherwise would find it very difficult to do so in the culture. It's in cigar lounges.
Yeah.
Have you ever found this? Do you ever go to any?
Yeah, I do occasionally go to a cigar lounge, and but I'm only laughing because the last cigar lounge I went to, I bumped into a friend of George Soros's, and before I'd gotten an opinion out, he was going full blast, and I just thought,
Well, and you're very recognizable in London.
Well, no, I just thought he didn't recognize me, and I just thought, I'm going to let you fly with this, and I just listened to him, and again, as I've said to you before, it's so much easier to make an emotional argument than it is to make a real one. But
and his was an emotional one.
they're all emotional arguments that come from that side because they're not. You can't think them through, so they have to be driven by emotion. Speaking of emotional arguments, well, not emotional arguments, I've got to go and watch the football with my son now because.
And I have to go do another interview.
Well, you do it, and I'm looking forward to getting to the bottom of this with you. Let's
listen to this.
Yeah.
Listen to this very quickly.
Okay.
I want to leave you with this.
Yeah.
This cheery bit of Marxian poetry. This is from Karl Marx.
Oh, God.
Then I will be able to walk triumphantly like a god through the ruins of their kingdom. Every word of mine is fire and action. My breast is equal to that of the Creator.
Ooh, okay. So there's food for thought for next time. Here's the question that we can start off with next time. Do these people see themselves as equal to their creator? That would be an interesting place to discuss. Let's keep that on. Let's put that on ice and start with it next time.
This has been a great WTF. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you. Me too, my love.